Hi, I'm Danielle Lee, and I'm going to discuss Emergency Management Australia with you. Emergency management in Australia began in the civil defense era. While they were not technically threatened by civil defense in World War II or World War I, they were prepared and had volunteer citizens trained and prepared in order to defend their country if need be. While these volunteer organizations fell apart after the war, they were recalled when the Cold War happened. Obviously, they weren't doing a whole lot with the Cold War, but they were trained, and when disasters happened, they were called upon. In 1967, there was a huge fire that broke out on Black Tuesday in Tasmania that killed 62 people and injured 900. And this called for a national organization for disasters. It also had a huge outcry for a disaster fund, and that created the National Disaster Organization of Australia. And that organization would serve as the main national organization for the disasters for a few decades, until eventually the Civil Defense Service and the National Disaster Organization would combine and become Emergency Management Australia. Disaster management in Australia is primarily handled by the states and the territories. The state emergency systems are managed primarily, obviously, at the state levels. The Emergency Management Australia handles some funding. They do a lot more of the education, as well as making sure that everything is organized. Basically a lot of the same functions FEMA does, except that when the state declares a state of emergency, unlike FEMA, they don't automatically assume funding and they don't automatically go in. They actually wait until the state has actually used all of the resources before they go in. Obviously, the local level governments are the first to begin, because Australia is much like the United States and they start at the bottom level. They also have lots of non-governmental organizations such as the Red Cross and others that work together to help when the disasters strike. These groups all work together when planning, preparing, and training, and they work on mitigation and risk reduction. There are lots of types of disasters that strike Australia. Cyclones, tsunamis, earthquakes, brush fires, forest fires, landslides, floods, man-made and technological disasters are just a few. On my slide, I have a picture of Cyclone Yazi, which we will discuss in a few moments. This slide is to show the cost. This is from 2001. This is the past 30 years. This shows how expensive flooding is in Australia. Obviously, a lot of the land is very low-lying. Some of the major events, obviously we discussed Black Tuesday, the fires that killed so many people. Cyclone Tracy was the first test of the National Disaster Organization. It was a Category 4 cyclone that hit Darwin, and it demolished 90% of the buildings. With doing that, it actually, while the death and injury toll were fairly low for that type of disaster, it did require more building codes, and so far the building codes have not been tested, which is a good thing. But they are hoping that the building code that they upgraded to because of that. Cyclone Tracy was also, because of the devastation, the national government actually had to come in and take over. They took over, evacuated everybody, and kept a bare minimum of 10,000 individuals there just to recover and do the response and then rebuild before they allowed people to resume normal life. The Newcastle earthquake in 1989, 50,000 buildings were damaged and 1,000 people were left homeless. Another devastating property value-wise, obviously, and that was an earthquake that not a lot of people lost their lives, but a lot of buildings were damaged. The Sydney hailstorm in 1999 was the most costly insurance up until that point, and it was estimated to cost between $1.5 to $1.7 billion. The heat wave of 1999 in 4 days in southern Australia killed over 304 people. Most of them were elderly. And then, of course, just this year we've had numerous amounts of flooding, and then, as I mentioned, Cyclone Yazi, which was another cyclone that hit with 180 mile per hour winds, and the death tolls in those have not been accessible to where I could find them yet. And that is a little bit about Australia's emergency management system. Thank you.